Hello and welcome to the second part in our Abiding in Jesus series. And today is entitled Thinking. How do we ensure that we're abiding in Jesus in our thought life? In 2007, one of the world's leading violinists, Joshua Bell, performed an experiment, and he went to a metro station in Washington, D.C. with his violin costing millions of dollars, and he began to play the 6 most beautiful songs in his repertoire. Some of the greatest music being played by one of the greatest musicians. Feel free, if you want, to stop this video and have a look on YouTube for Metro Violin Joshua Bell and see what happens. No one stopped. Hundreds, if not thousands of people walked by. Children would pull their parents over to stop, but they were too preoccupied by their own busyness. One woman alone recognized him and spoke to him. In the busyness of our lives, it's all too easy for us to rush on and hurry on by while missing the most beautiful sound that is playing right next to us. That sound that is wanting to catch us up into something far greater than we so often settle for. But in our case, that beautiful sound isn't a violin at a metro station, but the love of Jesus in our everyday moments. And that's what this Abiding in Jesus series is all about. It's about catching us up into that greater sound, that we would live in and for something so much better than we currently do. That we would build in rhythms and structures to our lives that would enable us better to abide in Jesus and his love, and so be more fruitful, as we read in John chapter 15. In the last session, we ended by considering something called a rule of life as a means of helping us build these structures into our lives. And I just want to reiterate that a rule of life isn't about building in restrictive lists of rules into your lives to weigh you down and make you feel guilty when you don't achieve them, but rather it's about building a trellis which enables us to better grow up into Jesus, which allows the vine, as it were, to grow more easily and more fruitfully. Hopefully you've got access to the PDF example rule of life chart that I produced. If you haven't, then feel free to email info@redeemercls.com, whether you're part of our church or not, and we'd love to send that out to you. And today we're going to consider the first section of that chart, which is our thinking. There's all sorts of potentially negative influences on our minds, especially right now in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, where we're bombarded with news headlines and stats every day, where we scroll through social media and we see different people's opinions about the future of the world, and we turn on Netflix for a bit of an escape. All sorts of influences are filling our minds. And I want to say that your brain is an amazing thing. Even into adulthood, your brain is incredibly changeable. MedicineNet.com tells me this about neuroplasticity: the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Neuroplasticity allows the neural nerve cells in the brain to compensate for injury and disease and to adjust their activities in response to new situations or changes in their environment. In other words, the stuff we fill our minds with changes our brains. Which synapses remain and which wither away depends on your mental habits. Of course, God, being the creator of the universe and the creator of human beings and being the great scientist, knew this all along. That's why he inspired the Apostle Paul in Romans 12 verse 2 to write these words: "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your minds. In other words, changing the way we think changes us. Or listen to how he puts it in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Or the Message translation puts it, fill your mind and meditate on these things. Indeed, so powerful is your mind that what you fill your mind with massively concerns our enemy, the devil. He is seeking to influence what we put into our minds and seeking ultimately to destroy us, because his ways are always anti-Jesus and they're definitely anti-abiding in Jesus. And so he wants to fill our minds, and he wants us to fill our minds with all sorts of things which are going to take us away from Jesus. There is a battle going on for your mind right now. If we don't grasp that, then we'll be a bit laissez-faire about what we fill it with. The big point in all this is to say that you are not a victim of your thoughts with no control over them. For all of us, there will be thought patterns that lead us away from abiding in Jesus. For me, it tends to be in the areas of anxiety and of comparison. And it's true, I can't just stop thinking negative thoughts. But what I can do, and what we can all do, is to choose what we pay attention to. And what we pay attention to will be what we think about, and so will be what our minds are fixed on. The language the Bible uses is the language of setting your minds on things. So Colossians 3 verse 2 says, set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. Romans 8 verse 6 says, for to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. Isaiah 26 verse 3 puts it this way, you keep him or her in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you. I don't know about you, but I want a life of, I want my life to be filled with peace rather than death. And the key that these verses are saying for that to happen is where our minds are set. It's what we are paying attention to. In his book, A Hidden Wholeness, Parker Palmer shares the story of farmers in the Midwest who would prepare for blizzards by tying a rope from the back of their door, the door of their house, to their barn, to ensure that when a blizzard came, they could return home safely by following the rope. When they came in full force, these blizzards, the farmer couldn't see the end of his hand. Many froze to death, disorientated by their inability to see their way home. I think it's really easy for us to get lost in the blizzards of our thoughts and lose our way spiritually. Often those thought blizzards come when we say yes to too many things. Being busy and hurried is a sign of success in our culture, and so we're exhausted. We fill our minds with so many things, so many thoughts are there because we just keep stuffing them. And in the blizzard of our minds, we need a rope to lead us home. We need a rope to lead us back to Jesus again and again, to help us abide in him, to dwell with him, to have our lives centered on him. And so we're just going to spend some time today considering what that rope might look like in practice. We're going to go through various practices that might help us keep abiding in our thought lives in Jesus. But before we do that, I want us to consider something or consider what some of the ropes are in our lives that we've established already that maybe are leading us away from Jesus. In other words, unhelpful ropes that aren't helping us go to Jesus but are taking us in the other direction. What potentially harmful things are we filling our minds with? And in a 40-minute talk, which this will be, I don't have time to consider all the potential candidates for such ropes. I'll leave you to discern that with God. But what I do want to do is consider in our culture what is potentially the biggest barrier to our thought lives abiding in Jesus, and that is technology. The invention of the smartphone changed the world. John Mark Comer, in his book I mentioned last time, makes this point really well when he speaks of the significance of the year 2007. This was the year Steve Jobs released the iPhone. A few months earlier, Facebook opened up to anyone with an email address. It was the year Twitter became its own platform. It was the first year of the cloud and the App Store. 2007 was the real start of the digital age. And there have been many blessings. I'm not saying get rid of all technology, let's go back to the dark ages. I'm not saying that. But we need to realize also the incredible challenges, especially to our spirituality, that these things, these technological advances have brought. Sometimes we don't even realize it, but today I want us to become aware, if we're not already, of the threat it is to our spirituality. Before the internet, any moments of boredom were potential portals of prayer. I'm sure many of you, like me, have been standing in queues outside Aldi or B&Q. They're my two biggest queues up to this point in the last couple of months. And I don't know how you spent your time in those queues. I don't know how many of you, like me, have spent time browsing on your phone, emails, social media, checking the news, checking the weather, making an online purchase, whatever it may be. And in the last few weeks, I've been pondering this and working this through with God. I've tried. My last queue was in B&Q, and I didn't use my phone. I stayed away from my phone, and I've tried to use those down moments, those potential moments of boredom as portals of prayer, to pray blessing on those around me, to thank God for things in my life, to listen quietly to what he might be saying to me. A survey of young adults in America found that 77% answered yes when asked this question. When nothing is occupying my attention, the first thing I do is reach for my phone. 77% say yes to that. And before you dismiss that as a miracle, I don't think we're that much different in this nation. Another study found that the average iPhone user touches their phone 2,617 times a day. And I doubt it's much different for the average Android phone user either. The first president of Facebook, Sean Parker, now calls himself a conscientious objector to social media. He said this in an interview: "The thought process that went into building these applications like Facebook was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible." There's a bombardment of stats and quotes for you, but all with this one big spiritual point. The distraction of our ever-present digital devices is robbing us of the ability to be present to anything, let alone present to Jesus, to abide in our thinking in Jesus, and therefore to flourish in the life that he has called us to. John Ortberg writes this in his book, The Life You've Always Wanted. For many of us, the great danger is not that we will renounce our faith. It is that we will become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we'll settle for a mediocre version of it. We'll just skim our lives instead of actually living them. Ouch. When I first read that, I felt real Holy Spirit conviction. Maybe it's just me. Or maybe there's others who are with me. Wouldn't you love to be less distracted? For your thoughts in your idle moments to be drawn to Jesus rather than to your device? I definitely would. And so very practically, I think this starts with us putting some rhythm, some routine, some things in our lives about how we're using our digital devices. A rule of life. A good starting test maybe is to see how addicted you are to your phone, is to turn it off for a 24-hour period. Some of us this won't be a problem for. Some of us this stuff on technology isn't an issue. And that's fine. But there'll be other, seek God about what it is that distracts your thoughts away from Jesus. But for many of us, this will be an issue. So if it's off for 24 hours, how does that feel? I've made a habit of doing that now, imperfectly. I don't do it every single week, but I try and do it, have a kind of digital Sabbath once a week where my phone is off completely for the day. And when I first started doing that, I found it pretty painful. I think it showed up a bit of an addiction in my life. My go-to so often was to my phone, pull it out of my pocket, just see what's going on, see what's happening. And suddenly I had these idle moments that I could do something else with, that I could turn my attention to Jesus or to other things. It's become so freeing for me. So there's one rhythm you could potentially build into your life, a weekly digital or phone Sabbath. But here's a few other ideas about managing our phones so they don't fill our minds and attention. Again, remember, these are just ideas for a trellis. Feel free to come up with your own or ignore them entirely, whatever's helpful for you. Perhaps taking emails and social media apps off your phone would be helpful. Maybe building a schedule of times when you're going to check either of them. Something I've started using a lot more is the do not disturb option. I didn't even realize it existed, or I don't know what the equivalent might be on your phone, but the do not disturb option on my phone, so that I don't get notifications flashing up when I'm trying to focus on other things, whether that be Jesus, time with Jesus, praying, or even just working, or time with family or friends. So maybe use that do not disturb option. Leave your phone in another room at key times, at meal times, at times playing with your children, at times when you're spending with Jesus, when you go to bed. Have a set time in the evening when you stop using your phone. Turn it off and leave it in another room. This is definitely one I need to work on. I'm on my phone often way too late in the evening checking things. But I'm trying to grow in that, and I feel the more I'm growing it, the more I'm able to end the day well. I'll tell you what, if we can get rid of our phones earlier in the evening or sometime before we go to bed, leave it in another room, I think our sleep will improve massively. It will also help our first thoughts in the next day if the immediate thing isn't to look at our phone because our phone's not right next to us in our bedroom. I guess for many of us, the first thing we do often is to check our phone. I bought an alarm clock so that I don't have to have my phone next to me in the bedroom to know what the time is in the night or when I wake up in the morning. Maybe that's something, if you don't have it already, you could do. Don't look at your phone until you've had time with Jesus in the morning. I often use an app on my phone for my morning quiet times, and so that's maybe not entirely doable for me. But again, I use the do not disturb option. I make sure the phone's away from me, not right next to me, so that I can focus my thoughts, focus my attention on Jesus. So there's some thoughts, but I want to encourage you, be creative. Tell someone else what you're planning on doing. Whatever, just do something so that you create space in your life that isn't monopolized by the digital devices, by your phone in particular. that can so easily take over. Allow space for your thoughts to turn more and more to Jesus. I'll tell you what, he is much more beautiful than an iPhone. And before we move on from this whole area of technology, without wanting to go too overboard, I just want to comment briefly on TV streaming. Again, for some of us, maybe at the moment, TV streaming is coming into its own. We've got a bit more time. We can't go out, so we put Netflix on or whatever. But I simply want to ask, when we think about TV streaming, the same question: what are we filling our minds with? For many, Netflix or Prime or whatever it is may dominate your spare time. Can I urge you to review over the next couple of weeks how much on average are you watching of these TV streaming things a week? Remember, they're designed to be addictive. They're designed to draw you in and to make you want more. Claire and I, as we've started watching a particular series on Netflix recently, have just become well aware of that in our own lives, and we've had to talk about putting some restrictions in so we don't just flick over to that, that just one more episode type mentality that can so easily come on us. Put a limit on the number of hours of TV you feel you should watch in a week. But I'm not talking about how much you're watching. I'm also talking about what you're watching. Does it fit the Philippians 4 test of being something that's true and honourable and just and pure, etc.? Everything we let into our minds affects our souls. Now, there's not a list of things that Christians can and can't watch. That's not there in the Bible, and I'm not going to put one here. It's not about a legalistic list, but I would just urge you just to seek God and prayerfully consider if this thing that you're watching fits well with your conscience and with what the Spirit is saying to you. For all of us, there will be some things that I believe we'll have to say no to watching. It'll be different for different people. But be sensitive to the Spirit's leading. And so, having considered one of the big ropes that leads our thoughts away from Jesus, that of technology, that just basically gets us lost in the blizzard of our thoughts, what I want to do now is consider some of the ropes that we can build in our everyday lives that will lead our thoughts to Jesus, to help us abide in him. And again, this list is definitely not exhaustive. But it's just some ideas to get you going for your own life, for your own personality, for your own context. And they come under the category, most of it's going to be under the category of prayer and Bible. And then we'll spend a bit of time, very brief at the end, just talking about the worship and thanksgiving sections. So under the prayer and Bible stuff, firstly, silence and solitude, the practice of silence and solitude. When we think about our thoughts taking us in all sorts of directions away from Jesus, one of the reasons for that is simply the sheer volume of noise in our lives. There are so many demands and so many voices. If you're anything like me, the blizzard of our thoughts sometimes gets a bit overwhelming. C.S. Lewis, in his book The Screwtape Letters, has the demons railing against silence as a danger to their own cause. And their cause, of course, is to ruin Christian souls. Screwtape calls the devil's realm a kingdom of noise. And he claims we will make the whole universe a noise in the end. In contrast, Psalm 46, verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." There is something about just being still, quiet, silent in the presence of God that helps us know who God is. Our minds are given some breathing space, and God is able to reveal himself to us in all of his beauty and splendor. Jesus knew that. Mark 1 verse 35 says this of Jesus, "And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed." And I'll tell you, this was not a one-off thing for Jesus. This was a habit that we read about again and again in the Gospels. Why did he go off when it was dark and go to a desolate place? Because he wanted silence. Because Jesus was a busy man. Crowds were following him all the time. He was bombarded by noise, and he knew the truth. Be still and know that I am God. And so he built times of silence and solitude into his life. This is so important because even our prayer lives can become places of busyness and hurry, where we whiz down a list of things to pray through and tick off, and yet we never get still before God. We might be sitting still, but our brains aren't still. I think the most important thing we can do in prayer is Psalm 46 verse 10. Let's be a community of Psalm 46 tenors. Let's make that who we are as we quieten down, not just the external noise, that's relatively easy and quick to do, but the internal noise. You know, that running commentary that's always going through our heads. As we do that, I believe it makes room for Jesus to set our minds on him. It will lead us away from anxiety and towards peace. And this kind of longer silence and solitude may not be possible for you every day. Again, this isn't a rule. You must do this. If you're a stay-at-home parent, maybe that's not possible every day. But at the very least, I believe it needs to be built into our schedule in some form every week, that we can have some time. It can happen for each one of us. Just creatively, we can have a good chunk of time where we're just quiet before God, where we get away from the noise. For me, running is the best time for it. Where I can go on a run, I can get outside, away from my house, away from my study, away from my family, as much as I love my family, but just be away from the noise. And there God so often speaks and so often just brings life back to my soul and enables me to abide in Jesus again. Secondly, the daily office. I shared in the last session about the danger of a morning quiet time as a tick box. A morning quiet time, a bit of time every morning with Jesus is absolutely essential, but it's not enough. That's what I'm saying, where you just tick it off and then you get the God stuff out of the way and then you can get on with the rest of your life, with the rest of your day. That doesn't work. 2 hours later, if you're like me, the sense of God's presence will be pretty much have disappeared. The sense of any sort of abiding in him will not be there anymore. Those closest to me or to you, your friends, your family, your colleagues at work, are certainly not getting a sense of Jesus coming from you in the way that you're speaking or acting. In his book, The Practice of the Presence of God, which I need to confess I've never actually read, but I've read so many quotes from, I feel like I have read it. Brother Lawrence writes this: "He does not ask much of us, merely a thought of him from time to time, a little act of adoration, sometimes to ask for his grace, sometimes to offer him your sufferings, at other times to thank him for the graces past and present he has bestowed on you. In the midst of your troubles, to take solace in him as often as you can. Lift up your heart to him during your meals and in company. The least little remembrance will always be the most pleasing to him. One not need cry out very loudly. He is nearer to us than we think." And then again he writes, "Do not be discouraged by the resistance you will encounter from your human nature. You must go against your human inclinations. Often, in the beginning, you will think that you're wasting time, but you must go on. Be determined and persevere in it until death, despite all the difficulties. And the daily office, or sometimes also spoken of as the liturgy of the hours, is an ancient discipline of the church which helps us to do that. And it's ancient, but I think it has very modern relevance for us in our noisy digital age. King David practiced set times of prayer 7 times a day. Psalm 119, verse 164. Daniel prayed 3 times a day. Daniel 6, verse 10. Jesus' early followers seem to have set times of prayer each day. Acts 3, verse 1 and Acts 10, verse 9. And in around AD 525, St. Benedict structured these set prayer times around 8 daily offices for his monks in his monastery, including one in the middle of the night. Now, I'm not saying we should become monks, and I'm not saying we need to set an alarm in the middle of the night to pray, although if God's asking you to do it, don't let me stop you. But the point behind this practice of daily office, of stopping for set times of prayer throughout a day, is to be with God throughout the day, is to actually intentionally create moments where you are deliberately stopping and being in his presence. My suggestion is to set aside small units of time for prayer in the morning, around midday, lunchtime, and then again in the evening. If you want to do it more, if you want to do it less, that's totally up to you. But that's 3 times is what I'm trying to build into my life. I'm not saying these are the only times to pray, but what I am saying is that building set times of prayer into your day will infuse a prayerfulness into the rest of your day's activities. And actually will help to eliminate this false sense of a sacred, secular divide in our lives. In terms of the details of these times, in terms of the length and what you actually do in them, there's massive flexibility. In fact, the key is flexibility. If it works for you, do it. If it doesn't, don't. Different circumstances, different personalities will mean we all do it differently. The key isn't to get stuff done in these times, but the key is to pause, to be with God, and to receive from God. The length doesn't really matter. As long as you're do whatever. do whatever length's helpful for you. It can be 3 minutes, it could be 30 minutes, depending on your context. But some helpful elements to include are silence for a couple of minutes, that you actually have just a brief sense of silence, you be still and know that he is God. Enable you to center your minds on Jesus, on who God is. Read a short section of the Bible, not a lengthy passage, but just maybe a psalm or a couple of verses, just to reflect on and meditate on. And then just give your thoughts and your prayers back to God. In terms of resources to help us with this practice of daily office, 2 of the best apps on a phone that I've come across are Lectio 365, which is about 10 minutes each day. You can listen to it or you can read it, and it's just really beautiful. Comes out from the 24/7 prayer movement, really helpful resource. Or another one is Common Prayer, a liturgy for ordinary radicals, which has a short office for morning, noon, and night. I'll put a link to both in the comments below this YouTube video so you can look into them further. Maybe some of you are thinking, well, this sounds great, this sounds ideal in an ideal world, but you don't understand my life, Ali. You don't understand that I'm a stay-at-home parent with toddlers around my feet 24/7, or you don't understand that I'm in an intense office environment where there's no breathing space all day. I do understand. I mean, I'm not in either of those contexts, but I do understand. But I also honestly think it is possible for every single person to build this in, even if it's only for a few minutes each time. I love the story of Susanna Wesley, the mum of John and Charles Wesley, the founders of the Methodist denomination, great preacher and hymn writer. She had 19 children, although sadly 9 died in infancy, but still she had a lot of children around her feet at any one time, I'm sure. And she had a practice where she would lift her apron over her head to signal to her children that she was praying and she was not to be disturbed. Maybe you don't want to do that, but I encourage you, be creative in making these times to stop, to pause, and to pray, and to fix your eyes on Jesus, a built-in part of your everyday life. And learn from each other. Ask others who are in similar context to you how they're doing it, and learn from one another. However you do or don't build the practice of daily office into your life, can I urge you definitely to do one thing, and that is to consider how you start and end your day. The psalmist understood the importance of both. Psalm 119, verse 147, he said this: I rise before dawn and cry for help. I hope in your words. And then Psalm 63, verse 6, he says, I remember you upon my bed. It doesn't matter whether you're an early bird, whether you're a night owl, whether you're neither, you still have to start the day and end the day at some point. And what you choose to do as you start and end, what you choose to fix your mind upon and your thoughts upon as you start and end, will massively affect how you abide in Jesus throughout the day and throughout the night. One final practice you may find helpful to build into your routine in some form is an end of day before you go to sleep practice, and that's called the prayer of examen. This was popularized by Ignatius of Loyola in the 16th century, and it's all about reviewing your day and centering your thoughts on Jesus before you go to sleep. On the 24/7 prayer website, there's a really helpful 4R process to follow. And again, I'll put the link in the comments below. It's not prescriptive, but it may be helpful. And the 4 R's are this. Number 1, replay. Think over your day like a movie replaying in your head. Notice what you're noticing. What made you happy? What made you anxious? What made you angry? Number 2, rejoice. Thank God for those things which are obvious, but also thank God for the non-obvious things which we sometimes forget, like random acts of kindness, or being healthy, or a positive conversation, or a nice meal. Number 3, repent. Say sorry to God for the moments that come into your mind from the day where you know you've fallen short, where you've pushed him out, where you've hurt others. Receive his forgiveness afresh. And number 4, reboot. Make a decision in your heart to live for Jesus tomorrow and ask for grace to see his presence more clearly. So that's all under the category of daily office. And hopefully some practices, some thoughts there which may be helpful for you. And thirdly and finally on the Bible and prayer section is Bible meditation. Hopefully it's obvious, but reading or listening to the Bible is absolutely essential if our thoughts are going to abide in Jesus. Psalm 1 verses 1 to 3 says this: Blessed is the man or the woman whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In our context now, the law of the Lord is the whole Bible, and the way that we become planted like a fruitful tree, as this psalm describes, isn't by a quick flick through our Bibles from time to time, but it's about meditating on the truths contained in that book day and night. In other words, turning the truths over in our minds again and again. So perhaps memorizing verses is a practice you can build into the rhythm of your life. You might want to memorize whole chapters or whole books, but I'd encourage you to start at least with memorizing what I would call some sword verses, some verses which are key for particular things, areas of thoughts that you struggle in and move away from Jesus in. Memorize some verses that you can speak into yourself that kind of come against those weak areas for you. Another practice is for Bible meditation is called Lectio Divina. It began in the 3rd century, led by the early church father Origen. And it's all about reading the Bible slowly, prayerfully, and thoughtfully. So pick a short passage, absolute max a chapter, but probably much less. Psalm 23 is probably a good place to start, and you go through it in four key steps. Again, the steps aren't, you don't have to follow these steps rigidly, but this is the kind of the process, the kind of trajectory you want to go on. So first of all, read it slowly, out loud if you can. If you're drawn to a word or a phrase, just pause on that for a few moments. Secondly, reflect. So read it again. This time focus even more on those words and phrases that seem to be speaking with you and resonating with you. Listen to what God might be saying to you. Thirdly, respond. Talk to God about your thoughts from what you're reading. And fourthly, rest. Pause to sit in God's presence before you return to the noise of life. So prayer and Bible, absolutely massive areas that we need to build into our lives in helpful ways if our thought lives are going to abide in Jesus. But another huge whole area is that of thankfulness and worship. Colossians 3:15-17 says this: "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." Paul starts off by instructing us to let peace rule in our hearts. Well, that's all well and good, Paul, but how do I make myself be peaceful? You can't do that. But what you can do is, well, Paul gives us some other instructions after that command to let peace rule. And I think those other instructions are things that we can do which enable peace to flow. They enable us to abide more in Jesus in our thought life, and so consequently peace will flow. So first of all, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. We've already spoken about the importance of filling our minds with the Bible. Secondly, sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Some of us probably love singing, some of us probably hate singing. Whatever you feel about it, biblically it is a command. And it's a command because it enables us in our thought life really powerfully to connect and to abide in Jesus. And so I'd encourage you to make a habit of it daily. Whether that's in the shower, whether that's on your commute, whether that's at dinner time, wherever it is. Or if you'd rather not sing, put on some worship music daily and allow your internal voice to sing along to it. And of course, don't just limit your worship to singing. I feel God wants to give some of us permission to be creative, to be the creative people he has called us, he has made us to be. Draw, write, paint, dance, rap, whatever it may be. I would love us to be bombarded as Redeemer Church with creative expressions of worship coming from different people in the community. And thirdly and finally, and this is the big one, and what we're going to close this session with, be thankful. So important is thankfulness to abiding in Christ and receiving his peace in our minds that he says it in this passage, not just once, but 3 times. Build a rhythm of thankfulness into your life. Maybe every night, thank God for something from that day. Maybe every week with other people, share things that you're thankful for. Maybe get a thankfulness jar where you put things in and take things out each day. This is something we used to do as a family but have got out of the habit of, but maybe we'll bring back as a result of this. Deliberately slow down enough to actually savor the good blessings that you're enjoying. If you're enjoying a nice meal, if you're enjoying a hot cup of tea or some fresh air in the sunshine, reading a book with a young child, whatever it may be. Let's be careful not to be so busy and so distracted that we miss those moments as moments to abide in Jesus through thankfulness and gratitude to him. James 1 verse 7 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. In his book, Letters to Malcolm, C.S. Lewis has this wonderful reflection about thankfulness where he says this: one's mind runs back up the sunbeam to the sun through thankfulness. I want to intentionally learn such habits of adoration more and more in my life. I want them to be built into my life. But sometimes it starts just by just slowing down, by being present, and by savouring the moment that God has put before you. Developing such habits of thankfulness and adoration in everyday life will lead our thoughts away from negativity that can so easily cloud them and towards Jesus and towards abiding in him. To close, I just want to encourage you to take some time this week just to think and pray through what God might be saying to you, what habits and practices he might be asking you to build into your life to enable you to abide in Jesus in your thinking. The area of technology, the area of prayer and Bible, the area of worship and thanksgiving, or any other area that God may be bringing to your mind. Isaiah 26 verse 3 once again says this: you keep in perfect peace the one whose mind is stayed on you.